I've been selling my handmade goods online since 2008, and let me tell you something. This is the hardest it has ever been. Things have changed a lot since I started selling my handmade jewellery on Etsy back in 2008. Back then, it felt like a different world. We were in the midst of free trade and globalisation, and the world still felt like it was opening up and full of potential. Now, things have changed. It feels like we're getting more insular, more inward turning. It feels like it's getting harder and harder to do trade between different countries. And honestly, it's not a feeling, it's a fact. This video was spurred by the whole US trade tariff thing that is going on right now. And honestly, when you're watching this, I have no idea what the outcome of that is going to be, because frankly, it keeps changing. It seems like on a daily basis at this point. It is currently the middle of April 2025. And I feel like, the news tells us every day that the US has changed its mind about what it's doing with its tariffs. But I think at the moment, long story short, there are going to be tariffs, and we are just out here outside of the US. We're just on tenterhooks going, who knows what's going to happen? But this is not the only thing that has changed, and this is only the latest in a long line of things that have happened that have made it harder and harder to trade internationally. And this year has been particularly bad. So when I first started selling online, as far as I knew, I could pretty much sell anywhere. There weren't really any tariffs or customs charges or restrictions on where I could sell my handmade jewellery. The world was my oyster, and I took advantage of it. I've sold to so many countries over the years, but that pool has been slowly getting smaller and smaller as time has gone on. Now, I'm here in Australia, so obviously your mileage may vary based on what country you're in, but generally speaking, there have been some global changes that have affected most of us. One that comes to mind is the lucid packaging system that was brought in Germany back in 2022, which meant that most of us couldn't ship to Germany anymore. Basically, the lucid packaging thing was a way for the German government to try to make importers responsible for the packaging waste they were creating. And so you had to set up an account with them and pay for it. For a small one-person business, it's just not worth the effort. So that's Germany off the shipping list. And then of course we had the GPSR, the General Product Safety Regulation, brought in by the EU at the beginning of 2025. If you want to import things into the EU from outside of it, you now have to have all these rules and regulations and packaging and labeling and a local representative. I mean, it's not something that a small one-person business can even think about achieving. There might be ways around it that are being developed. You might be able to pay someone a small fee to be your representative, but frankly, is it worth it? Maybe if you're in the UK and most of your sales are to the EU, it might make sense for you to figure that out. But for most of us, it's easier to just throw up our hands and take a big slash through every single EU country and say, sorry, we can't sell there anymore. That's what I've done, and as far as I'm aware, that's what most people have done who are not in the EU as well, at least at this stage. Now, even though I'm in Australia, I used to sell quite a lot to places like Germany and France, but not anymore. There are other examples. You might want to share them with us in the comments if you're aware of them, if they've affected you. And of course, depending on where you are, there might be regulations about where you're allowed to sell to. For those of us who sell on Etsy, some of you can't even use it because of where you're based. And of course, I've completely skipped over one of the most important things, at least for me, and that was COVID. Now, COVID was excellent in that it taught people how to shop online who might not have shopped online before. So in that way, it was positive for online business because it kind of forced people to learn how to do it. On the other hand, there was also an explosion in small handmade and online businesses because so many people were stuck at home or had lost their jobs. I mean, Etsy itself saw an enormous skyrocket in the amount of sellers. So the competition is higher than it has ever been before thanks to that. And for me personally, here in Australia, it completely stuffed up my international business, particularly my sales to the US. Before COVID, I probably had about 80% of my sales to the US because I could offer very cheap shipping. We used to have a very cheap untracked shipping option that was only a couple of dollars to send, because I'm sending jewelry, it weighs basically nothing and takes up almost no space. But when COVID happened, Australia Post, in their infinite wisdom, because it was costing them too much money, decided to slash that ability and take that feature away. And that meant my shipping costs to the US went from being like $3 to being $25 to $30. That is not a cost that you can just absorb. That is a cost you have to pass on to your customers. These days, probably about 40% of my sales are to the US. There are still people who are willing to pay it. And of course, with the dollar, the Australian dollar and the US dollar the way they are, it's actually still pretty reasonably affordable for people in the US because the Australian dollar is so much weaker that I can charge in Australian dollars, they pay in US dollars, and they pay a lot less in their own currency to buy my jewellery. So that is working in my favour. If the US dollar tanks, there will be no hope. So that was another nail in the coffin of easy global trade, at least from an Australian perspective. And now we come to the US tariffs, which of course is still a developing situation and very up in the air, and hopefully won't affect most of us because of the de minimis exemption, which means if you're selling, I think it's less than $800 US, if you're selling something to the US that's less than that, that the tariffs don't apply to you. But frankly, who knows? Donald Trump seems to change his mind on a daily basis as to what he's doing with those tariffs, so we really don't have any certainty around that. So all we can do at this stage is just keep kind of doing business as usual and hope that we can get away with it, basically. I'm basically just venting here. I don't really have a solution to this issue. I just kind of wanted to open this up for discussion because I think it's on a lot of people's minds right now, and it is something that a lot of us are worried about. And I just wanted to bring attention to this continual closing down of the world that seems to be happening, at least when it comes to trading. Because as business owners, we need to be aware of what's happening around the world, and we need to be aware how that's impacting our businesses. And we need to think to the future as to what we're going to do if more and more of these sorts of impacts continue to happen, which limit our ability to trade to other countries. I mean, the obvious solution is to focus more on domestic trade, which is a little bit frustrating because obviously, especially here in Australia and other countries, you might have a smaller population and therefore not as much opportunity to get your work out there in front of people. You know, we have like 28 million people in Australia. The US has something like 350 million people. It's a much larger market. I personally haven't done markets or any other sort of local sales for well over a decade now because I like selling online, and that's fine. I mean, I'm just going to have to focus my efforts more on the domestic market than the international market. And honestly, that is what's happening. You know, I'm getting many more domestic sales than international sales, but we might just have to get a little bit uncomfortable, try things we haven't done before, do some advertising, start actually doing local markets again, try to get into wholesale. And of course, I haven't yet even touched on the economic situation we're sitting in right now. I think we're all very aware that things are tough for many people right now. Interest rates have been high, mortgages are really high, people are struggling to buy food, let alone jewellery in a lot of cases. So the things that we handmade sellers make are very often nice to haves, not need to haves. And so that is making it even more difficult at the moment to have a successful and profitable business. I've seen so many of my fellow business owners fold in the last few years since this has all been going on, and it's really disheartening to see because I think now more than ever before it's important that we value quality, but we can't make people buy things and we can't change other people's economic situations. And of course, a thought for our fellow makers in the US, some of you might be watching this, that these tariffs are going to have an impact on you guys because it's going to increase the cost of a lot of your materials and your packaging and things like that that you do get from overseas. So it's very much affecting you as well. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What are your thoughts on this? What are your plans around this? Are you worried about it? Are you kind of going on with business as usual? How have you changed your business in the last few years based on everything that I've just talked about in this video? Has it been something that has been affecting you? And if you're someone new to business, just starting out, I'm aware that this video is probably a little bit scary and a little bit disheartening, but there's no point in sticking our heads in the sand and not being aware of the global situation around us because it does have a huge impact on our ability to sell our goods. The thing I most want you, if you are a new seller, to take away from this is you can't just blithely go into selling to wherever you want. You do need to be aware of all of these Byzantine rules and regulations around the world so that you don't end up getting in trouble with another country's government for doing the wrong thing. So, how are you handling all of this? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.